The metal chair scraped against the cold floor as Commander Zexthara shifted his weight. His 3 remaining eyes darted around the small room, taking in the sterile white walls and the recording devices that hummed quietly in the corners. The Kronan warrior's once proud carapace was now scarred and dented, bearing the distinctive burn marks of human plasma weapons. His left arm hung useless at his side, the limb twisted and blackened from a weapon he had never seen before the war. Across the metal table sat Investigator Veltar, a member of the Galactic War Crimes Tribunal. The tall, gray-skinned official adjusted his recording equipment and cleared his throat. Commander Zexthara of the former Kronan Empire, you stand accused of war crimes against the human species. Before we proceed with formal charges, you have requested to make a statement about your experiences during the invasion of human space. Is this correct? Zexthara's mandibles clicked nervously. Yes, but you must understand something first. Everything we thought we knew about the humans was wrong. Everything. The investigator nodded and activated the recording devices. Red lights blinked to life around the room. Please begin your account from the beginning. Tell us about the initial invasion plans. The former commander took a shuddering breath. 3 cycles ago, the Kronan High Command received intelligence reports about a species called humans. They lived in a single star system, barely beyond their home planet. Our scouts said they had basic fusion drives and simple kinetic weapons. Primitive technology. The High Command laughed when they read the reports. Zexthara's eyes grew distant as he remembered. Admiral Krexelon called them barely evolved primates during the planning meetings. He said conquering them would be easier than hunting wild beasts on our home world. The humans had no shields, no energy weapons, no faster-than-light communication. They were perfect targets for expansion. The investigator made notes on his datapad. How large was the invasion force? 50,000 ships, Zexthara replied. The largest fleet ever assembled by the Kronan Empire. Looking back, even the High Command knew it was excessive for such a small target. But they wanted to make an example. Show other species what happened when they stood in our way. He paused, his claws scratching against the metal table. I commanded the heavy cruiser Void's Edge. It was a beautiful ship, over 2 kilometers long, with enough firepower to level a small moon. I had served on her for 10 years, fought in 6 major campaigns. I thought I knew everything about war. The memory seemed to pain him as he continued. The fleet assembled at the edge of human space, near a small outpost they called Mars Station. It was supposed to be a quick strike. Destroy their defenses, capture their leaders, and force a surrender. The humans would become slaves. Their system would become a Kronan colony, and we would move on to the next target. Veltar leaned forward. What happened during the first engagement? Zexthara's remaining eyes closed briefly. We dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find a few patrol ships and maybe some orbital platforms. Instead, we found them waiting for us. Not just military ships, but hundreds of civilian vessels. Mining ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, they had all been converted into warships. His voice grew quieter. The human commander was named Jake Morrison. We intercepted his communications during the battle. He was young, maybe 30 of their years. He coordinated the defense from a converted mining station that should have been destroyed in the first 5 minutes of fighting. The investigator looked up from his notes. But surely your superior technology gave you an advantage. That's what we thought. Zexthara's mandibles clicked again. But the humans didn't fight like any species we had encountered before. They used their mining ships to ram our vessels. Not as a last resort, but as a planned tactic. They would load the cargo, holds with explosives, and drive them straight into our hulls. He shook his head slowly. I watched a human cargo ship called the Lucky Strike ram one of our dreadnoughts. The explosion was so bright it temporarily blinded our sensors. When the light faded, both ships were gone. The humans had sacrificed 100 crew members to destroy a ship with 3,000 Kronan soldiers. The memory seemed to disturb him deeply, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they kept fighting. Even when they were losing, even when their ships were breaking apart, they kept shooting at us. I saw a human fighter pilot named Amy Carter. Her ship was on fire, her engines were failing, but she still flew directly into our engine core. Zexthara stood up suddenly, pacing to the small window. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She could have ejected. She could have surrendered. Instead, she chose to die just to damage our ship. Her sacrifice nearly crippled the Void's edge. He turned back to the investigator. "That's when I first realized we were not fighting a normal enemy. Normal species surrender when they're outnumbered. They negotiate when they're losing. They value their lives above abstract concepts like honor or freedom." The investigator made more notes. How did the rest of the fleet respond to this unexpected resistance? Admiral Krexelon ordered a full assault. He was furious that the humans had damaged several of our ships. He wanted to make an example of Mars Station to show them the price of resistance. Zexthara returned to his chair. "We focused all our firepower on the station. Our energy cannons should have destroyed it in minutes." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. But the humans had reinforced it. They had moved asteroids into position as shields. They had hidden weapon platforms throughout the debris field. And they had done something we didn't expect. They had turned the station itself into a weapon. The investigator looked confused. "What do you mean?" "The station was built around a large asteroid. The humans had hollowed it out for mining, but they had also placed massive engines on one side. When we moved in for the final assault, they fired those engines. The entire station began moving toward our fleet like a giant missile." Zexthara's claws scraped against the table again. Commander Morrison's last transmission was "Earth remembers Mars." Then the station exploded. The blast destroyed 12 of our ships and damaged 30 more. The humans had sacrificed their entire outpost just to hurt us. The room fell silent, except for the humming of the recording devices. The investigator finally spoke. What was the fleet's response to this? "We regrouped." Admiral Krexelon was shaken but not defeated. He ordered the fleet to advance deeper into human space. He said we would crush their spirit by attacking their colonies directly. Zexthara's eyes grew dark. He still believed we were fighting a primitive species. He thought their resistance at Mars was just desperation. The former commander leaned back in his chair. The human defenders at Mars Station had sent out a signal before they died. A simple message broadcast to every human ship and station in the system. It said, "They have come for us. Remember what we do to those who threaten our home." Veltar made final notes on his datapad. And what happened next? Zexthara's mandibles clicked one final time. The humans disappeared. Not just their military ships, but their entire civilian population. They evacuated their colonies, scattered their fleets, and vanished into the asteroid fields. We thought we had won. We thought they were running away. He looked directly at the investigator. We were wrong. They weren't running away. They were getting ready to hunt us. The recording devices continued their quiet humming as the room fell into an ominous silence. The investigator realized this was only the beginning of a much darker story. Commander Zexthara stared at the metal table for several long moments before continuing his testimony. The recording devices continued their quiet humming as he gathered his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tremor that had not been there before. 2 weeks after Mars Station, we captured the human colony of New Denver. It was a mining world with about 50,000 inhabitants. Admiral Krexelon expected the humans to surrender after seeing what happened to Mars. Instead, we found empty cities and abandoned facilities. The investigator Veltar looked up from his notes. The population had evacuated? Not evacuated, vanished. There were no ships leaving the planet, no emergency broadcasts, no signs of panic. One day the cities were full of humans, the next day they were empty. Our sensors showed no life signs anywhere on the surface. Zexthara's claws tapped nervously against the table. We thought they had simply run away. Admiral Krexelon was pleased. He said fear was finally working on the humans. The former commander's three eyes focused on different points in the room as he remembered. We established a garrison on New Denver. 5,000 troops to secure the mining equipment and prepare the colony for Cronin settlement. General Victor was confident. He said holding an empty planet would be easy. His voice dropped lower. The attack started 3 days later. Not from space, not from other planets, but from the tunnels beneath the cities. The humans had not fled, they had gone underground. Veltar made notes quickly. Underground resistance? More than resistance. They had turned the entire planet into a trap. The mining tunnels connected every city, every facility, every important location. The humans could move anywhere without being detected. They knew every passage, every hidden entrance, every weak point in our defenses. Zexthara stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, the lights of Nexus Prime twinkled in the artificial night. Captain Lisa Brooks led the first attack. We learned her name from intercepted communications. She was a cargo ship captain before the war, but she had become something else entirely. He turned back to the investigator. Brooks and her team used stolen transport pods to approach our ships. They looked like normal cargo containers, nothing threatening. But when they docked with our vessels, armed humans poured out. They moved through the ship's ventilation systems like some kind of parasites. The memory seemed to disturb him deeply. Humans are smaller than Cronin soldiers, more flexible. They could crawl through spaces that we thought were too small for any intelligent being. They would appear in the walls, in the ceiling, in places we never thought to guard. Veltar leaned forward. What kind of weapons did they use? That was the terrifying part. They used our own weapons against us. Brooks had somehow acquired Cronin plasma rifles, but she had modified them, made them smaller, lighter, more efficient. The humans learned to use our technology better than we did. Zexthara sat back down, his damaged arm hanging limply. I was aboard the cruiser Iron Fist when Brooks attacked. She and 12 other humans infiltrated the ship during a routine supply transfer. They split up and began hunting our crew through the corridors. His voice became almost a whisper. They didn't just kill our soldiers, they studied us. They learned how we moved, how we communicated, how we thought. Brooks personally eliminated Admiral Texman, but not before she had observed him for hours. She knew his patrol schedule, his habits, his weaknesses. The investigator made more notes. How did the humans acquire this intelligence? That was when we discovered the real scope of their capabilities. We had assumed they were primitive because they had no faster-than-light communication, but they had something else, something we had never encountered before. Zexthara paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. A human named Pete Collins had been working in the engineering section of New Denver when we arrived. He was just a maintenance worker, nobody important, but after the resistance began, we found evidence that he had been studying our technology. He shook his head slowly. Collins had somehow reverse-engineered our shield generators in just 2 weeks. It had taken Cronin scientists decades to develop that technology. But this human maintenance worker had figured it out by examining the wreckage from Mars Station. The investigator looked skeptical. That seems impossible. That's what we thought. But then human ships began appearing with modified Cronin shields. They were crude, inefficient, but they worked. Collins had not just copied our technology, he had improved it. Made it compatible with human power systems and human manufacturing techniques. Zexthara's eyes grew distant. But the shields were nothing compared to what came next. The humans had also captured one of our communication arrays during the attack. On Mars Station, we didn't think much of it at the time. What could primitives do with advanced Cronin technology? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. We discovered the answer when our own communication networks began. Broadcasting human propaganda. A specialist named Helen Ross had not just broken our encryption, she had turned our own systems against us. The investigator looked up sharply. Psychological warfare? Worse than that. Ross had studied our psychology, our culture, our deepest fears. She began broadcasting messages directly to our troops. Not threats or demands, but something much more disturbing. Zextara's claws scraped against the table again. She played recordings of human children singing. Simple songs, lullabies, the kind of music human parents use to comfort their young. But she broadcast them on our emergency channels, mixing them with images of dead Cronin soldiers. The memory seemed to pain him. The effect on our troops was devastating. Cronin warriors who had fought in dozens of campaigns began having nightmares. They would wake up screaming about human children singing while they died. Some soldiers refused to sleep, others became violent toward their own comrades. Veltar made rapid notes. What was the military response? Admiral Krexelon tried to shut down the communication networks, but Ross had embedded her programs too deeply. Every time we thought we had cleaned the systems, the singing would start again. She was playing with our minds, making us afraid of our own equipment. Zextara stood up again, pacing to the far wall. But that was still not the worst part. The worst part was when Ross began broadcasting real intelligence. She had somehow accessed our battle plans, our troop movements, our supply schedules. She knew things that only the highest-ranking officers should have known. He turned back to the investigator. She would broadcast our own secrets back to us, mixed with human propaganda. She told our soldiers about planned attacks before their own commanders briefed them. She revealed which units were being sent on dangerous missions, which bases were being abandoned, which officers were being promoted or demoted. The investigator looked troubled. How was this possible? We never found out. Ross had penetrated our security at every level. She knew our codes, our passwords, our security protocols. It was as if she could read our minds. Zextara's voice was filled with a mixture of fear and grudging admiration. She turned our own information networks into weapons against us. He sat back down heavily. The psychological impact was worse than losing ships or soldiers. Our troops began to distrust their own commanders. They wondered if their orders were real or if they were being manipulated by human intelligence. Unit cohesion collapsed as soldiers suspected their comrades of being human agents. The room fell silent, except for the humming of the recording devices. Finally, Veltar spoke. What happened to the garrison on New Denver? Zextara's remaining eyes closed briefly. They all died. Every single soldier. Brooks and her team hunted them through the tunnels for 3 weeks. We found their bodies scattered throughout the underground passages, but we never found the humans who killed them. He looked directly at the investigator. That was when we realized the truth. The humans had not been running away after Mars Station. They had been preparing. They had studied our weaknesses, learned our technology, and turned our own strengths against us. The investigator made final notes. And the fleet's response? Admiral Krexelon was furious. He ordered the complete destruction of New Denver. Our ships bombarded the planet from orbit until the surface was molten glass. He said we would make an example of the humans, show them the price of resistance. Zextara's mandibles clicked one final time. But when the bombardment ended and the planet cooled, we received a transmission from the ruins. It was Helen Ross, still alive somehow, still broadcasting. She said just 4 words, Earth remembers New Denver. The recording devices continued their quiet humming as the investigator realized that the war was about to become much more personal. The silence in the interrogation room stretched for several minutes as Commander Zextara gathered himself for the next part of his testimony. His 3 remaining eyes stared at the metal table, and his claws left small scratches in the surface. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new quality that investigator Veltar had not heard before: fear. After New Denver, everything changed. The humans stopped defending their colonies and started hunting us. They built hidden bases in the asteroid fields, places our sensors could not detect. From these bases, they launched attacks on our supply lines, our communication relays, our medical ships. Veltar looked up from his notes. Medical ships? Those are protected under galactic law. The humans did not care about galactic law. They had a different goal now. They were not trying to defend their territory anymore. They were trying to study us. Zextara's mandibles clicked nervously. They began taking prisoners. Not for information about our military plans, but to learn about our biology, our weaknesses, our anatomy. The former commander stood up and walked to the window, his damaged arm hanging at his side. A human named Dr. Frank Miller established a research facility on an asteroid called Echo Base. We learned about it when we intercepted communications between human ships. Miller was not a soldier. He was a scientist who studied alien life forms. He turned back to the investigator. Miller had been studying Cronin prisoners for months. He learned how our nervous systems worked, how our organs functioned, how our bodies responded to different chemicals and toxins. He was building a database of Cronin biology. Valtar made notes quickly. For what purpose? To create weapons designed specifically to kill us. Miller and his team developed gas compounds that could shut down Cronin breathing. They created sonic weapons that could disrupt our brain functions. They designed viruses that attacked our immune systems. Zexthara's voice became quieter. They were turning science into a weapon of war. The investigator looked disturbed. What happened to the prisoners? Miller's team performed experiments on them while they were still alive. They claimed it was necessary to understand how Cronin physiology worked under stress. They needed to see our reactions to different stimuli, different pain levels, different fear responses. Zexthara sat back down heavily. The prisoners were not killed quickly. Miller kept them alive for weeks, sometimes months, studying their reactions to various treatments. He was methodical, careful, scientific. He treated living beings like laboratory specimens. The room fell silent except for the humming of the recording devices. Finally, Valtar spoke. How did you learn about this facility? We captured a human transport ship carrying medical supplies to Echo Base. The crew was led by a nurse named Kate Lewis when we interrogated her. She told us about Miller's research. She seemed proud of what they were doing. Zexthara's eyes grew distant. Lewis said the humans had abandoned their old ideas about warfare. They were no longer interested in honor or mercy or following the rules of combat. They wanted to understand their enemies completely so they could destroy them. Completely. He paused, his claws tapping against the table. But Lewis was not just a nurse, she was also a military commander. After we captured her transport, she began coordinating attacks on our fleet from inside our own detention facility. The investigator looked confused. How was this possible? Lewis had memorized the patrol schedules of every Cronin ship in the sector. She knew our communication frequencies, our security codes, our standard operating procedures. While we thought she was just a prisoner, she was actually gathering intelligence. Zexthara's mandibles clicked again. She managed to contact other human ships using our own communication equipment. She gave them detailed information about our fleet positions, our weapon capabilities, our defensive weaknesses. She turned our own detention facility into a human command center. He stood up and began pacing. Lewis coordinated what they called Wolfpack attacks. Groups of small, fast human ships would surround a single Cronin vessel and attack from multiple directions. They used our own tactical information to predict our responses and counter our defenses. The memory seemed to disturb him deeply. I watched Lewis coordinate an attack on the heavy cruiser Star Crusher from her prison cell. She knew exactly where to hit the ship to disable its shields, where to target to destroy its engines, where to strike to cause maximum casualties. Valtar made rapid notes. What was the result? The Star Crusher was destroyed in less than 10 minutes. 800 Cronin soldiers died, and Lewis smiled when she heard the news. She was proud of what she had accomplished. Zexthara returned to his chair. That was when we realized the humans had changed. They were no longer the defensive, honorable species we had encountered at Mars Station. They had become something else entirely, something that enjoyed killing us. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The humans began using psychological warfare on a massive scale. They would broadcast images of dead Cronin soldiers to our fleet, mixed with recordings of human laughter. They sent messages to our families back home, telling them how their loved ones had died. The investigator looked up sharply. They contacted Cronin civilians. Lewis had given them access to our personal communication networks. The humans learned the names of our family members, our friends, our colleagues. They sent detailed descriptions of battlefield casualties to the families of dead soldiers. Zexthara's eyes closed briefly. They knew that Cronin culture values honor in death, so they made sure our families knew that their loved ones had died in fear, crying for their mothers, begging for mercy. They destroyed the honor of our war dead. The room fell silent again. Finally, Veltar spoke. What was the fleet's response? Admiral Krexelon tried to cut off all communication with home, but the humans had already penetrated our networks too deeply. They could contact anyone, anywhere, anytime. They began spreading rumors about military defeats, about cowardly officers, about soldiers who had betrayed their comrades. Zexthara's claws scraped against the table. Trust began to break down throughout the fleet. Officers suspected their subordinates of being human agents. Soldiers wondered if their orders were real or if they were being manipulated by human intelligence. Unit cohesion collapsed as everyone suspected everyone else. He stood up again, walking to the far wall. The humans were not just fighting our bodies anymore. They were fighting our minds, our culture, our society. They were trying to destroy us from the inside. The investigator made more notes. How effective was this strategy? More effective than any weapon we had ever faced. I watched veteran soldiers break down and refuse to fight. I saw officers abandon their posts because they no longer trusted their own crews. I witnessed entire units turn against each other based on rumors and suspicions. Zexthara turned back to the investigator. The humans had learned to think like us. They understood our fears, our weaknesses, our cultural values. They knew exactly how to break us psychologically. He sat back down. But the psychological warfare was not the worst part. The worst part was when we realized the humans were hunting us individually. They had compiled detailed files on every Cronin officer, every ship commander, every important figure in our military. His voice became barely audible. They knew our names, our histories, our families, our personal habits. They were not just fighting the Cronin Empire anymore. They were fighting each of us personally. Veltar looked up from his notes. What do you mean? The humans began targeting specific individuals. Not just military leaders, but scientists, engineers, communication specialists, anyone who might be valuable to the war effort. They would track down individual Cronin officers and eliminate them in personalized attacks. Zexthara's mandibles clicked nervously. They knew that Commander Vextar always inspected his ship's engines at the same time every day, so they placed a bomb there. They knew that Admiral Texman had a favorite observation deck where he liked to watch the stars, so they positioned a sniper there. He paused, his three eyes focusing on different points in the room. They were not just killing us. They were demonstrating that nowhere was safe, that no one was beyond their reach. They were showing us that they could strike. Anyone, anywhere, anytime. The investigator made final notes. How long did this campaign continue? 6 months. For 6 months, the humans systematically hunted down every important figure in our fleet. They eliminated generals, admirals, engineers, doctors, communication specialists. They destroyed our command structure piece by piece. Zexthara looked directly at the investigator. By the end of those 6 months, we were no longer an invasion force. We were refugees running from an enemy that seemed to know everything about us. The humans had turned us from predators into prey. The recording devices continued their quiet humming as the investigator realized that the worst was yet to come. Commander Zexthara remained silent for a long time, staring at his damaged claws as they trembled against the metal table. The investigator Veltar waited patiently, knowing that whatever came next would be the most difficult part of the testimony. When the former Cronin commander finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Kepler Station was supposed to be our final victory. Admiral Krexelon had grown tired of the human raids, tired of losing ships to their Volfpack attacks, tired of watching his officers disappear one by one. He wanted to end the war with one decisive battle. Zexthara's three remaining eyes focused on the window, watching the artificial lights of Nexus Prime flicker in the distance. The humans had established a massive mining facility in the Kepler system. It was built around a large asteroid, maybe 50 kilometers across. Intelligence reports said it had a population of 200,000 workers and their families. He turned back to the investigator. Admiral Krexelon saw it as the perfect target. The station was isolated, far from other human bases. It had valuable mining equipment that we could use for ourselves. And most importantly, it was too big for the humans to evacuate quickly. Veltar made notes on his datapad. What was the attack plan? Simple and overwhelming. We would surround the station with the entire remaining fleet, cut off all escape routes, and demand surrender. If they refused, we would board the station and take it by force. Admiral Krexelon was confident that the humans would not sacrifice 200,000 civilians. Zexthara's mandibles clicked nervously. I commanded 10,000 assault troops for the boarding operation. We had studied the station's layout, identified the main power centers, the command sections, the life support systems. It should have been a routine military operation. The former commander stood up and began pacing. The fleet arrived at Kepler Station 3 weeks after our intelligence gathering was complete. We expected to find the humans preparing defenses, maybe setting up weapon platforms around the asteroid. Instead, we found them working normally, as if nothing was happening. He paused, his claws tapping against the wall. The station administrator was a man named Colonel Dan Rivers. He had been a military engineer before the war, but he was working as a civilian mining supervisor when we arrived. Our communications specialist intercepted his transmissions to the station workers. Veltar looked up. What did he say? Rivers told them to continue their normal duties. He said the Cronin fleet was not a threat, that everything was under control. He sounded calm, almost relaxed. Admiral Krexelon thought Rivers was trying to prevent panic among the civilians. Zexthara returned to his chair. We surrounded the station and broadcast our surrender demands. Rivers responded within an hour. He said the people of Kepler Station would never surrender to an invading army. He said they would fight to the last person if necessary. The investigator made rapid notes, and the Admiral's response? Admiral Krexelon gave them 24 hours to reconsider. He thought that faced with the destruction of their families, the humans would change their minds. He was still thinking like a rational military commander fighting other rational beings. Zexthara's eyes grew distant. During those 24 hours, we monitored the station's communications. The humans were not preparing to evacuate. They were not building defenses. They were modifying their industrial equipment. He leaned forward. Rivers had spent those 3 weeks since our intelligence gathering turning the entire mining station into a weapon. Every corridor had been rigged with hidden guns. Every room contained explosive charges. Every piece of machinery had been converted into an instrument of war. The investigator looked disturbed. They were planning to fight? More than fight. They were planning to die fighting. Rivers had no intention of surrendering or evacuating. He was going to turn Kepler Station into the largest trap in galactic history. Zexthara's voice became quieter. When the 24 hours ended, I led the first wave of assault troops to the station's main docking bay. My soldiers were confident. We had energy shields, plasma weapons, military armor. We were fighting civilians with mining equipment. He stood up again, walking to the window. The docking bay was empty when we arrived. No guards, no resistance, no signs of life. The humans had left the doors open for us. Admiral Krexelon told me over the radio that it was proof the civilians were too scared to fight. The memory seemed to pain him deeply. We advanced into the station in standard formation. 2,000 soldiers moving through the main corridors toward the command center. Our sensors showed no human life signs, no weapons, no threats. Zexthara turned back to the investigator. That was when we learned about Sue Carter. She was a maintenance worker who had been employed at the station for 10 years. She knew every pipe, every wire, every system in the entire facility. Veltar made notes. What did she do? Carter had reprogrammed the environmental control systems. As my troops moved through the corridors, she began flooding different sections with toxic gases from the mining operations. But she did it slowly, carefully, so our soldiers would not notice until it was too late. His claws scraped against the table. The first symptoms were dizziness and confusion. My soldiers thought it was just stress from the mission. Then they began having trouble breathing, trouble thinking clearly. By the time we realized what was happening, half of my force was already poisoned. The investigator looked up sharply. What about your environmental suits? Carter had studied our equipment during the 3 weeks of preparation. She knew our suits were designed to filter out known toxins, but not the specific chemical compounds used in human mining operations. She had found a weakness in our technology and exploited it. Zexthara sat back down heavily. As my soldiers began collapsing, the human defenders revealed themselves. They appeared from maintenance shafts, from ventilation ducts, from hidden passages that did not appear on any station blueprint. He paused, his 3 eyes focusing on different points in the room. These were not trained soldiers. They were miners, engineers, technicians, ordinary civilians. But they fought like creatures. Possessed. They used mining lasers as sniper weapons or crushers as execution devices, heavy machinery as improvised tanks. And the memory seemed to disturb him deeply. Colonel Rivers coordinated the defense from the command center. He had turned the station's own systems against us. The artificial gravity would suddenly reverse, sending my soldiers flying into the ceiling. The lighting would strobe at frequencies that disrupted Cronin vision. The communication systems broadcast human war songs at volumes that caused physical pain. Veltar made rapid notes. How did your forces respond? We tried to fight back, but every move we made had been anticipated. Rivers had spent 3 weeks studying our tactics, our weapons, our standard procedures. He knew how we would respond to every situation. Zexthara's voice became barely audible. When we tried to advance toward the command center, we found that the corridors had been turned into mazes. The humans had welded metal plates over doorways, created false walls, blocked passages with mining equipment. We were forced to move exactly where Rivers wanted us to go. He stood up and began pacing again. The worst part was the mining equipment. The humans had turned every tool into a weapon. Excavation drills became torture devices. Chemical processors became gas chambers. Transport vehicles became mobile fortresses. The investigator looked disturbed. What happened to your assault force? They died, all of them. 10,000 Cronin soldiers killed by civilian mining workers using improvised weapons. Zexthara's mandibles clicked nervously. But they did not die quickly. Rivers wanted us to suffer, to understand what it felt like to be hunted and killed. He returned to his chair. The humans had set up communication jammers throughout the station. My soldiers could not call for help, could not coordinate with each other, could not even surrender. They were isolated and alone as the civilians hunted them through the corridors. The room fell silent except for the humming of the recording devices. Finally, Veltar spoke. How did you survive? I was in the last group to enter the station. When the communication jammers activated, Admiral Crexelon ordered the remaining ships to maintain distance and wait for contact. I never made it past the docking bay. Zexthara's eyes closed briefly. I listened to my soldiers die over the radio. I heard them screaming as the humans used mining equipment to tear them apart. I heard them begging for mercy as the civilians showed them none. He opened his eyes and looked directly at the investigator. The last transmission came from Communications Officer Barry Wells. He was not a soldier, just a technical specialist who maintained the station's equipment. But he had become something else during those 3 weeks of preparation. Veltar leaned forward. What did he say? Wells activated the station's self-destruct sequence. He said that if the Cronin Empire wanted Kepler Station, they could have. What was left of it? Then he began counting down from 10. Zexthara's voice trembled. The explosion consumed the entire asteroid. 200,000 humans died instantly, along with my remaining soldiers who were still inside. The blast was so powerful it destroyed 12 ships from our fleet and damaged 30 more. The investigator made final notes. And this was when the war turned decisively against. Commander Zexthara sat in complete silence for nearly 10 minutes after finishing his account of Kepler Station. His 3 remaining eyes stared at the metal table, and his damaged claws left deeper scratches in the surface. The investigator Veltar waited patiently, knowing that the final part of this testimony would be the most important. When the former Kronan commander finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire room. After Kepler Station, there was no more Kronan invasion. There was only retreat. Admiral Krexelon ordered the surviving ships to withdraw from human space immediately. We had lost 60% of our fleet, most of our experienced officers, and all of our confidence. Zexthara looked up at the investigator. The Admiral expected the humans to be satisfied with our defeat. He thought they would be content to see us leave their territory. He was wrong. Veltar made notes on his datapad. The humans pursued your retreating forces. They hunted us like predators following wounded prey. The former commander's mandibles clicked nervously. Within days of our withdrawal, human ships began appearing throughout the galaxy. Not just in their own space, but everywhere. They had somehow acquired faster-than-light travel capabilities that surpassed our own. He stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the lights of Nexus Prime. The humans formed what they called hunting fleets. Each fleet was led by experienced commanders who had studied our tactics during the invasion. They knew our ship designs, our weapon systems, our standard procedures better than we did. Zexthara turned back to the investigator. Admiral Roy Clark led the first hunting fleet. He had been a cargo ship captain before the war, but he had learned military strategy by watching our battles. Clark understood how we thought, how we planned, how we made decisions. The investigator looked up. What was their objective? Complete elimination. The humans were not interested in capturing territory or resources. They wanted to destroy every ship, every base, every outpost that had participated in the invasion of their space. Zexthara's voice became quieter. Clark's fleet tracked down our supply ships first. These were unarmed vessels carrying food, fuel, and medical supplies to our bases. The humans showed no mercy to the crews, even though they were non-combatants. He sat back down heavily. I was aboard one of the supply convoys when Clark attacked. His ships appeared out of nowhere, surrounding our vessels before we could escape. But instead of destroying us immediately, he broadcast a message to our convoy commander. The investigator made rapid notes. What did he say? Clark said the human government had issued a declaration of total war against the Kronan Empire. Every ship, every base, every individual who had participated in the invasion would be hunted down and destroyed. There would be no negotiations. No mercy, no surrender. Zexthara's claws scraped against the table, but then Clark said something else. He said the humans knew the names of every Kronan officer who had attacked their space. They had compiled detailed files on our families, our friends, our home planets. The war would not end with just military targets. The memory seemed to terrify him. Clark had a list of every soldier who had participated in the bombing of human colonies. He knew their names, their ranks, their service records. He said the humans would track down each one individually, no matter where they tried to hide. Veltar looked disturbed. What about non-combatants? Civilians? The humans made no distinction. They said every Kronan who had supported the invasion, directly or indirectly, would face justice. That included government officials, weapons manufacturers, shipyard workers, even families who had sent supplies to the military. Zexthara stood up and began pacing. Captain Nancy Stone led another hunting fleet that specialized in tracking down individual officers. She had somehow acquired complete records of our military personnel, including photos, personal information, and service histories. He paused, his 3 eyes focusing on different points in the room. Stone's fleet would appear at Kronan colonies and demand the surrender of specific individuals. If the colonies refused, they would be destroyed. If they cooperated, only the wanted officers would be killed. The investigator made more notes. How effective was this strategy? Devastating. Cronin colonies began turning against their own military personnel. Families would betray their own relatives to avoid being destroyed by human hunting fleets. The fabric of our society began to tear apart. Zexthara returned to his chair. But the worst part was yet to come. As the hunting fleets tracked down more and more Cronin officers, they began to learn something terrible about the invasion. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The humans had known we were coming. They had detected our fleet weeks before we arrived at Mars Station. They had time to prepare, time to evacuate, time to set up defenses. Veltar looked up sharply. If they knew, why didn't they surrender or negotiate? Because they wanted us to attack. The humans had been studying galactic politics for years. They knew that the Cronin Empire was expanding, that we would eventually target their system. They decided to use our invasion as an opportunity. The investigator looked confused. An opportunity for what? To eliminate us completely? The humans had developed a long-term strategy to destroy the Cronin Empire, but they needed us to make the first move. They needed us to be the aggressors so they could claim self-defense. Zexthara's mandibles clicked nervously. Everything we had encountered during the invasion was planned. The resistance at Mars Station, the guerrilla warfare on New Denver, the trap at Kepler Station. The humans had been preparing for our arrival for months. He stood up again, walking to the far wall. The humans had never been the primitive species we thought they were. They had deliberately hidden their true capabilities, their advanced technology, their military potential. They wanted us to underestimate them. The investigator made rapid notes. What was their true technological level? Far beyond our own. The humans had faster-than-light communication, advanced AI systems, weapons technology that surpassed anything in the galaxy. They had been concealing their capabilities for decades. Zexthara turned back to the investigator. The humans had been watching galactic politics, studying different species, learning about potential threats. They knew that eventually someone would try to conquer them. They were ready. He sat back down. The primitive fusion drives we had detected were decoys. The lack of energy weapons was deliberate misdirection. The humans had been preparing for interstellar war while pretending to be peaceful explorers. The room fell silent except for the humming of the recording devices. Finally, Veltar spoke. What happened to the survivors of your fleet? The hunting fleets tracked us across the galaxy. It took 2 years, but they found every ship, every base, every hiding place. Most of the crews were killed, but some were captured for interrogation. Zexthara's eyes grew distant. The humans wanted to learn about other species, other potential threats. They questioned us about Cronin allies, about other military powers, about anyone who might pose a danger to human space. He looked directly at the investigator. They were not just eliminating the Cronin Empire. They were gathering intelligence about the entire galaxy. The humans were preparing for future wars. The investigator made final notes. And now? Now the humans have established themselves as the dominant military power in this sector. They have colonies throughout former Cronin space, advanced bases, near every major trade route, and intelligence networks that span the galaxy. Zexthara's voice became barely audible. The surviving Cronin refugees have tried to warn other species about what the humans really are. But most governments do not. Believe us, they see humans as peaceful traders and explorers. He leaned forward. But we know the truth. The humans are not peaceful. They are apex predators who have learned to disguise themselves as harmless prey. They study their enemies, learn their weaknesses, and then eliminate them completely. The investigator looked up from his notes. What do you think the humans will do next? They will continue expanding. They will identify new threats and eliminate them before they become dangerous. They will use the same tactics they used against us, making their enemies underestimate them until it is too late. Zexthara's claws scraped against the table one final time. The humans have shown the galaxy something terrifying. They have proven that the most dangerous predator is not the one that roars the loudest or appears the strongest. The most dangerous predator is the one that hunts in silence, strikes without warning, and leaves no survivors to tell the tale. He stared directly into the recording devices. Any species that threatens humanity will face the same fate as the Cronin Empire. They will be studied, hunted, and eliminated. The humans will not negotiate, will not show mercy, will not stop until every threat is destroyed. The recording devices continued their quiet humming as Zexthara delivered his final words. We thought we were apex predators hunting primitive prey. We discovered we were prey that had stumbled into the domain of Earth's true apex predators. The humans did not just defeat us. They erased us from existence. The investigator turned off the recording devices as the room fell into an ominous silence. Outside the window, the lights of Nexus Prime continued to twinkle, but somehow they seemed less bright.